What is up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined today by Michael Augello and Karine Hains of the Hockey News. Got lots to talk about on this August Thursday, but before we do, want to get into all of the latest and greatest storylines from around the NHL. Want to remind you that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue. To kick things off, head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right. Well, we love a little news drop, a little hockey news drop in the middle of August. You guys, we've got an extension to announce. The Pittsburgh Penguins have signed forward Ville Koivunen to an 8-year, $32 million extension. So that's $4 million per. He's 23 years old. He had 7 points in very limited action, 39 games in the NHL last season, but he performed very well at the AHL level, 41 points in 34 games with Wilkes-Barre Scranton last year. So, Mike, obviously a lot of time, a lot of tenure to commit to such a young player who is so relatively inexperienced at the NHL level. But do you think this is maybe a contract that might age pretty well if the player ends up outperforming it?
It could, and clearly Kyle Dubas and the Penguins are big fans of Koivunen. He was a Carolina draft pick, second-round pick. He was a big scoring star in Liga. And then he was the main piece coming back in the Jake Gensel deal. So they like him. And, after his first taste in Pittsburgh, he was almost a point per game in a limited window. He did not have a really good year and half a season with the Penguins, but he's scored at the American Hockey League level, and clearly they like him. So I think they're willing to take the risk. But I also think that this is it's a situation that they can extricate themselves from, because he's 23 years old. They have until the age of 26 where they can buy him out on a 1/3 buyout. And that's a situation where, Cody Hodgson back in the day with the Buffalo Sabres, they did that with him. And there have been other players that have gone the 1/3 buyout route. So I think if they get him as a fourth liner and he's making $4 million a year with the cap going up, it's not a ridiculous situation, but they do have outs in case it doesn't work.
Karine, what do you think of this contract? Obviously, like Mike said, this is a player that Pittsburgh is very high on and they believe in. But what do you think about giving such an extensive contract to such a young and inexperienced player?
Well, I think it can be a bit of a trap. It can be a bit dangerous. The player himself wasn't very happy with his own season because, he knew it was a year he was going to sign a new contract, wasn't pleased with how it went. But to see the team commit like that must be a very big plus. For him, it's a real confidence builder, really. The only thing I have to say about that contract, though, is that it screams of Jesperi Kotkaniemi for me, because it is just quite a reminder of the 8-year deal the Hurricanes gave to him. And we know that backfired. So, cautionary tale if there ever was one.
Very true. Could go either way. Could end up being a steal of a deal if he outperforms it, but could also be a Kotkaniemi situation as well. So we'll have to see how that contract ages. We got to talk about Detroit. I feel like that's a weekly thing now. We have to talk about the Detroit Red Wings, still without a general manager. Owner Chris Ilitch has hired a search firm to help find the team's new general manager. So the assistant general manager, Sean Horkoff, has been handling all of the GM duties in the meantime, while the team is seeking new leadership. So, I mean, Mike, what do you make of this whole situation in Detroit? Obviously, there is a Dylan Larkin-sized elephant in the room that they still need to deal with. What do you think about this search that they're going with, and obviously using an outside search firm? Is it going to help them find the right fit? Is there anyone who sticks out to you who could be a right fit in Detroit?
Well, I mean, this is the same tactic that the Maple Leafs used after they fired Brad Treliving, and they went into the offseason, and their Keith Pelley, their CEO, brought in a firm, and they talked to 55 people, and then supposedly, and then in the end, it was one of the 50. It wasn't one of the 55 that they chose. They chose John Chayka outside of the search that apparently occurred. So I think this is a delay tactic. I mean, I think they probably have an idea who they want, but they maybe don't want to rush into something. In terms of who would be a good fit, I mean, I think it's the usual suspects in terms of the names that have been out there for open GM positions. Scott White, the current Dallas assistant general manager, who was a finalist with Toronto and in the mix in Vancouver. I know Evan Gold just took a job as an assistant GM and with the New York Islanders. So, but it's very possible that it's going to be an internal candidate like a Draper or a Chris Draper or a Harkov, but they probably want to go through the optics of bringing in a firm and looking outside the organization before they decide to go inside with an assistant of Steve Yzerman, who we know all the pitfalls of Yzerman.
Yeah, Karine, it's a really difficult situation that the Red Wings find themselves in now. I mean, in August, still without a general manager after Yzerman stepped down from his role. So it kind of limits their options there, you would think, in terms of who they would bring in and what kind of changes they're going to make. Do you see them making any other changes once they do bring in a new general manager? And who do you think it could be?
That's a good question, but I think one of the main concern in Detroit has got to be that, the relation between Steve Yzerman and Dylan Larkin really soured at one point. So I think that might be why they're looking outside and they brought in a firm, actually, because maybe they want to have like a break from the old regime and see if they can kind of sweet talk Larkin into staying. But then if you do that, how good is it for your room? I'm not sure, to have your captain who said, I actually want out. So, I expect they probably will go through the firm process, but much like the Leafs, I wouldn't be surprised if they just went with someone outside of that purview, so to speak.
Yeah, I guess at this point you kind of have to explore whatever options are available to you if you are Detroit and see what happens there. But yeah, getting down to the wire here, August. Now that we are into the beginning part of August, majority of teams are finished with their off season. They've done most of their major moves. So I want to kind of go through each of the divisions and see which teams did best and which teams did worse. Just in terms of the moves that they made during the offseason to improve their team. So I want to start in the Atlantic Division. So obviously looking at Buffalo, Tampa Bay, Montreal, Boston, Ottawa, Detroit, Toronto, Florida. Looking at all of those teams, Mike, who would you say had the best offseason and also the worst?
Okay, you could have to first say that winning the offseason does not mean you're going to do well in the regular season, because I remember some people saying last year Vancouver had an unbelievable offseason and then they were the worst team in the NHL. That being said, I think the best offseason in the Atlantic Division was the Toronto Maple Leafs, because they added essentially an entire bottom six. They added a starting goaltender that they're hoping is not over the hill in Sergei Bobrovsky. They added purportedly a number one defenseman in Darren Radish, and they added a potential cornerstone player with the first overall pick in Gavin McKenna. There's obviously they need a lot of things to fall into place, but I looked at them, and the only other team that you could really say would be Florida, because they added Brady Tkachuk. But I think there's some questionable moves with adding Radko Gudas and Markstrom as a goaltender replacing Bobrovsky that make me pause. In terms of the worst in the Atlantic Division, to me, it's clear. It's the Buffalo Sabres. They lost Alex Tuch. They traded Bowen Byram. They made a good deal. They made a good trade for Olin Zellweger, but they made two good trades and they still got worse. And we're now in the beginning of August, and they have not closed the gap of the 44 goals that they have subtracted from their roster. And they're going into the season with the same goaltending, and they have not traded for Connor Hellebuyck as of yet. So I would say it's clear the Buffalo Sabres.
Karine, what do you think? Atlantic Division, best offseason, worst offseason?
Well, I agree that the Leafs had a good offseason. Would I say that it's the best one? I'm not sure, because yes, they did a lot of change. They brought an entire bottom six, as Mike says, but they kind of remind me of Barry Trotz, what he tried to do in Nashville, and that backfired spectacularly. So, have a bit of reserve with the Leafs. I think I'd give it to the Florida Panthers because, even without doing anything, they improved greatly this offseason with Tkachuk. Well, Matthew Tkachuk's going to be LT now. Barkov is going to be back. I mean, they're going to be like leaps and bounds ahead of what they did last year. And then by picking up Brady Tkachuk as well, they've obviously become the team with the most Uber pests in the NHL. So that should be interesting. As for the worst, I agree with Mike. It has to be the Buffalo Sabres. And I think if the rumored deal for Hellebuyck was in fact on the table and it was just a matter that I think it's the Jets who wanted to get a first round pick on top of what they were actually getting from Buffalo. That was just greedy. It would have been a good trade for Buffalo, and they just can't go in the new season with the same goaltending tandem, to be honest. So yeah, I agree with Buffalo on that point.
All right. Well, looking at the Metro division now. So staying in the East, but now looking at your Stanley Cup champion, Carolina Hurricanes, the Pittsburgh Penguins, Philadelphia, Washington, Columbus, Islanders, Rangers, Devils. Mike, who of those teams do you think has had the best offseason and who's had the worst?
The clear winner is the Washington Capitals, adding Alex Tuck, adding Jordan Kyrou. I think, they have one of the best coaches in the league and Spencer Carberry, and Alex Ovechkin coming back. I still think they have some weaknesses, especially up the middle, but I think that they're dramatically improved, and I think that they will challenge for one of the top 3 spots in a weak Metro division. In terms of the worst, I'd say it's the Philadelphia Flyers. In spite of the fact that they went out and they signed Leo Carlsson to an offer sheet, and that was a bold move. It didn't pan out. They didn't get him. They're extremely weak up the middle. I think they added a good 1B goaltender in Joseph Wall, but that was essentially the only thing that they did of consequence other than sign some of their own players to extensions. So, I think that, they can't hope that everything falls into place because it's tough for things to fall into place 2 years in a row. They needed to improve, and they really didn't.
All right. So Mike says best offseason in the Metro was Washington. Worst was Philadelphia. Karine, do you agree or disagree with those picks?
I think it's hard to disagree, and the hockey fan in me loves what Washington has done actually, just because this might be Alexander Ovechkin last season, and it's great that he's going to be so well surrounded. I'm hoping it works out for them, and Mike's got a very good point that the Metro is actually going to be a very weak division, so it's not going to be all that hard to get into the playoffs. Might come into a little bit of problem when they lock horns with the Atlantic, but that's not a topic. As for Philly, Brière took a huge swing and it ended up being a miss. But, that was out of his control. I mean, he couldn't force Anaheim not to sign their own player. So, but the thing is that now they find themselves with no improvements up front whatsoever to speak of. So, yeah, they're the losers of this offseason in the Metropolitan Division.
Well, and I think even though he's in the Pacific Division, I mean, you got to say that the Ducks are losers in this situation too. They end up having to pay a lot of money, probably more than they would have liked, to sign Leo Carlsson. So maybe you give Philadelphia a little bit of credit there. But in terms of improving their own roster, agreed. Lots to be desired there. Like I said, we're in August. Most of the big moves have been made already at this point. We're kind of starting, rosters are starting to come into view, and we know generally what teams are going to look like here, but there are still some guys remaining on the free agent market, specifically goaltenders. And even in August, these guys are still unsigned. So the top 5 remaining free agent goalies in the NHL right now: Peter Mrazek, James Reimer, Matt Murray, Cam Talbot, and Connor Ingram. So looking at these names, obviously a lot of veterans here, a lot of experience, not necessarily any top flight goaltending talent here on this list, but nonetheless, a lot of valuable experience. So, Mike, of these goaltenders, who do you think is most likely to be signed with an NHL team before the start of the season?
I think it's undoubtedly Ingram. If you look at the other four, Talbot and Reimer are in their late 30s, even though Reimer played really well late in the season for Ottawa. Mrazek is not a good goaltender and hasn't been for a number of years. And Matt Murray was a good goaltender, but simply can't stay healthy. Ingram, for a horrendously defensive Edmonton Oilers team, I think he was just under 900 save percentage, but he played well. And I think some team out there that's looking for a backup or even a third goaltender, if they're willing to carry a third goalie on their roster, could do a lot worse than Connor Ingram. So I think he would be a risk worth taking.
Well, I would say having watched Connor Ingram play behind a very strong defensive team with guys like Roman Josi and Matthias Ekholm in Nashville, he definitely can hold his own in net. So would not be surprised to see someone take a flyer on him. Karine, any of those other names that I mentioned that you think will come off the board here before the end of the offseason?
Well, it seems to me there's a reason they're still on the board. And for two of them, the age, as Mike mentioned, Reimer, Talbot, and then, staying healthy, that's a big part of a goaltender's job because, you've got such a pivotal role. There's only two goalies or three at most in a team. So if your guy is injured, it's kind of a disaster. So I'd be really wary of trying Matt Murray. And as for Mrazek, well, there's not much there in terms of consistent performance. So that would be a big gamble too. It would be shocking.
All right. Well, Karine, since we have you today, do want to ask about the Montreal Canadiens and what they've been up to this offseason. So recently they agreed to terms on a new 1-year, 2-way contract with a restricted free agent defenseman, Maksymillian Szuber. So his new contract with the Canadiens carries an $850,000 NHL cap hit. So he'll be paid $135,000 in the AHL, guaranteed to earn a minimum of $175, regardless of where he plays during the 2026-27 season. So first, want to get your thoughts on that deal and for the player.
Well, that's depth signing for Montreal. There's a big congestion on the blue line for the Canadiens. So even though that's a two-way, it would be really surprising if he got to see any action in the NHL. Last year, the Rocket had Adam Engstrom and David Reinbacher, who are pretty much NHL ready. So I think the Canadiens have been keen to add reinforcements for Laval because they expect change. So these new guys that they're bringing in, they will get a chance, but in Laval because it's a full house in Montreal already.
All right. Well, he's a restricted free agent, or was a restricted free agent before he signed that deal. The Canadiens still have some restricted free agents left to deal with this offseason. So Zach Bolduc, Arbor Xhekaj, Sasha Pastujov. I mean, of all of those guys, Karine, what do you think that the Habs should do with these remaining RFAs? Because time's ticking here.
Well, the most interesting case, if you ask me, is Arbor Xhekaj. And what's interesting about this situation is that there's interest for him around the league. He can bring a lot to a team. He's got a big physicality factor, but Martin Saint-Louis just doesn't trust him. So, when he played in the playoffs, there was one game, I think, against Buffalo where he played under 2 minutes. I mean, that's not great. And Xhekaj could actually have filed for arbitration this summer, but he elected not to. By choosing not to go for arbitration, he left himself open for offer sheets. And I think that's a way of saying, I'd like a new beginning elsewhere, because he's not really getting a chance in Montreal. He's been there in a duel with Jadon Struble for years now, and Adam Engstrom is inviting himself to the table now. So I think for Montreal, the smart thing to do, considering the coach isn't trusting Xhekaj much, would be to actually trade him to get something in return, because it's not a sustainable situation. And his agent was on TSN 690 the other day saying, at the end of the day, the Canadiens will do what's best for the Canadiens, and Arbor Xhekaj will do what's best for Arbor Xhekaj. And for a 25-year-old guy, I don't think staying put and being the seventh defenseman is what's best for you. So we'll see what happens. As for Bolduc, that's another interesting case because the Canadiens have only had 1 year to evaluate him. So where does he land? What kind of cap hit should he have? We've seen Kent Hughes give bridge deals to the likes of Kirby Dach and Alex Newhook. that's what I would expect for Baltic. Maybe like a 3-year deal, somewhere between 4 and 5 million. I think Colin Graff in San Jose is a good comparable. So if I was to have a guess, I'd say 3-year at 4.5 would be fair for Baltic.
Mike, what do you think happens with these 3 remaining RFAs in Montreal? It's an interesting point that Karine brings up about Xhekaj and his situation.
Yeah, first on Bolduc, I agree with what Karine is looking at in terms of a gauge of what he could get on a short-term deal, simply because, I mean, they've got so many player or team-friendly deals that they can afford to give a Bolduc a $4.5 million deal. Other teams wouldn't be able to do it, but since they have Demidov and Hudson and the core 3 locked up under $10 million, they can be a little more flexible. As for Xhekaj, I mean, clearly, the rumors are out there. Philadelphia has been connected to him. I've heard Calgary. He's looking for an opportunity. I would be surprised, honestly, if they trade him inside the Eastern Conference, because he's the type of guy you don't want to play against, because he's a physical guy and he'll lay people out and he'll drop the gloves. And if at all possible, you don't want to have to deal with that guy more than once or twice a year. So I would say, Calgary needs some help on the blue line, and there are other teams in the West that could use a blue liner. And I think he has fans around the league because he's a physical, big defenseman. So I don't think they have a problem. Will have a problem trading him. It's just a question of whether they get what they think he's worth on the open market.
All right. Well, we talked about the Toronto Maple Leafs earlier as being a new look team. They've done a lot, made a lot of changes this offseason. Whether that means, it'll translate into success in the regular season, still to be determined. But, part of that new look team in Toronto is Teddy Blueger, traded there this offseason. He's going to be looking to be part of they're hoping to spark a turnaround after a very disappointing season that they had in Toronto last season. Blueger had 17 points, 9 goals, 8 assists in 35 games for the Canucks last season, dealing with injuries, of course. But, Mike, what do you think the expectation should be in terms of the performance level for him now that he's on the Maple Leafs, and what role is going to be expected of him?
He struggled with a lot of injuries last year and didn't play badly when he came back. His success was a few years ago when Dakota Joshua, a current Maple Leaf, was his line mate, and they worked well in the playoffs. I think that John Chaika is looking at that and hoping that the Lightning will strike twice. I think he's in the mix basically as a 4th line guy. He can play center and wing, so there's some flexibility there. He is a good penalty killer. I don't think they're looking for a ton of points from him, but if they can get like 25 to 30 points, I think they'll be happy. But I think, that one of the things that the Leafs have struggled with over the last few years is the fact that their bottom 6 has been completely a disaster zone, and they're looking for contributors. That's why they brought in the guys like Colton Sissons and Blueger and Jack Roslovic. So, and they traded for Nick Paul. So I don't think the expectations are high in terms of him being an offensive contributor, but they're hoping that he is involved in special teams and being a good defensive forward.
Yeah, defensive responsibility, I think, is what he provides primarily. And same with a guy like Colton Sissons. I think, talked about building or rebuilding that bottom 6 in Toronto, Karine. It does have shades of Barry Trotz in Nashville, although Barry Trotz tried to rebuild a top 6, which is a little bit different, but still definitely comes with a lot of risks here. So what do you think should be expected of a guy like Blueger and his role in Toronto?
I think he's going to put a good battle to get in that top 6, and it might actually solidify, give the Leafs some stability down there. But, saying it's all great to want a clean slate, a new start, and, the best of intentions. But at the end of the day, you never know what's going to happen. Is he going to be able to stay healthy? Is he going to be able to, build on the good end of the season he had? We'll see. But I think it's always good for a team to have plenty of depth, and that's what he's going to be bringing.
All right. Well, want to head over and talk about Chicago for a minute because they are a team without a captain. Because Nick Foligno, he was the team's captain from the 2024-25 season. He got traded last year to Minnesota to join his brother. So you would think, as kind of a face of the franchise, that Connor Bedard would be the next captain in Chicago. Just got his contract extension. Like I said, a number one draft pick, face of the franchise, but he's going to be out, expected to be out until November at least, after having shoulder surgery in the offseason. So, I mean, how much do you think that really matters, Mike, in terms of, whether he's going to be on the ice or not? Do you hold off on naming a captain in Chicago, or do you think that it automatically goes to Bedard?
I hold off on naming a captain, and not because he's going to be out till November, but because he's very young. And I always hesitate when it comes to naming, young captains. I mean, it worked in Montreal with Nick Suzuki, and it's worked with Sidney Crosby and Connor McDavid, but it hasn't worked back in the day with a guy like Jack Eichel in Buffalo, or even going further back, Brian McCabe, when I think he was 21 or 22 years old at the Islanders. Here's a long shot. If the rumors are true of Jonathan Toews coming back and re-signing with the Blackhawks, which there are rumors out there of him coming back because Patrick Kane is coming back, how about making Jonathan Toews the captain for 1 or 2 years until Connor Bedard is a little older and a little wiser? I don't know about Patrick Kane being a captain, but he has come back and they are paying him enough money. So if they tell him you're going to be the captain, be the captain. But if Jonathan Toews does come back as a 1-year holding pattern, I would do that.
Yeah, lots of risk involved with naming young captains. Like you said, I would throw Quinn Hughes in that category as well in Vancouver. So there's a little bit of, pluses and minuses when it comes to naming those young captains. But Karine, Bedard obviously is the face of this new wave of the Chicago Blackhawks and what they hope to rebuild or build a new dynasty around him. Now, whether they've been successful in doing that so far is another question. But if you're looking at Bedard and his role with the team, what do you think? Do you think that he automatically gets the captaincy, or do you hold off?
Well, first of all, I'd say that even though Jonathan Toews' nickname was Captain Serious, you can't be serious, Mike. Come on. Come on. I mean, Toews has announced his retirement. He may come out of retirement, but you know what? He can support a guy like Connor Bedard without having a C on his jersey. He doesn't need to have it. So, yeah, I would hold off. I would give it to Bedard. It's his team, and it's going to be his team for at least 5 years now. It's not, it didn't work in the old days, but this is no longer the old days, Mike. Live with the times. It works for the youngsters now.
To quote the Joker, why so serious?
Yeah, I don't know about Jonathan Toews, but Patrick Kane's back, like you said, so who knows? I would have to agree. I wouldn't really be in a rush to give Kane the captaincy, but if you're paying him enough, like you said, you can have him do it maybe for a year or two. All right, there were a lot of players who had some solid breakout seasons this past year in the NHL, but as we know, it's not always guaranteed that they're going to see the same sort of production in the coming season. So I mean, Mike, anyone who stands out to you as like a real breakout player from this last year, who you think is a candidate to regress in the coming season after having a really strong year?
I'll give you two, one closer to home and one that probably will get me flamed on social media. One is Josh Doan, who had a breakout year with the Sabres and scored close to 30 goals. And I think he's a really good young player, but now he's got the long-term deal. And he was a third-line guy, and there was no pressure on him. With Alex Tuch gone, now there's going to be more of an emphasis and more of a focus on him, probably moving into a top 6 role, and that's a tough thing. So he could have a successful season, but he could regress to the high teens or the low 20s, and it's not even close to what he did last year. The one that will probably get me flamed is Matthew Schaefer. I mean, Matthew Schaefer was phenomenal, but can he do it 2 years in a row? And everybody's going to be out there looking and say, "Oh, Matthew Schaefer, he's the next Makar, he's the next Hughes." Okay, we know sophomore slumps happen, even with really good players. It happened with Nathan MacKinnon back in the day in Colorado. His first year was great, his second year was not great, And then now he's bounced back and been a Stanley Cup winner. But, there could be a little bit of a regression there with Matthew Schaefer, and people shouldn't overreact to it, but it's a possibility.
Karine, you agree with those regression candidates? Anyone else who sticks out to you as a possible regression season?
I don't agree with Schaefer, actually. I think he'll be just fine. I mean, people said the same thing about Lane Hudson. And then, he had a brilliant rookie season and he topped it in his sophomore season. So I don't see the jinx affecting Schaefer. The one guy I've got on my radar for regression is, and I'm going to catch some heat from Abs fan on this one, but maybe Oliver Kapanen. Because, he did get 22 goals in his rookie season, but that was playing on the Canadiens' second line, more or less as a default, because there was nobody else to do it. Now, say if Kent Hughes manages to actually, do a trade this summer and bring someone on, then he might lose that spot. And if he does, where does that leave him? On the bottom six, how well is he going to perform there? Who knows? So that's one guy I think that might regress this season.
Well, if you wanted to catch flack from Montreal fans, you would have said Demidov, but then I don't think.
Yeah, but that's not what happened, Mike. So
we're not trying to rage bait fans here, but good picks here. Good picks for those regression candidates. Of course, possibility, not a guarantee. I want to wrap up today talking about the guys who are still rumored to be or reported to be confirmed to be on the trade market right now. So trades can still happen. And we already talked about Dylan Larkin, how he has requested a trade out of Detroit. But then a guy like Connor Hellebuyck also has been rumored in trades. Mike, you mentioned him earlier with Buffalo and potentially being involved in a trade there. So looking at these guys who are still rumored to be on the trade market, Morgan Rielly is another one. So who do you think is the most likely to be traded by the start of the regular season, Mike? Or do you think that none of them gets traded?
I think one of them would be traded. I'll go least to most. Rielly is the least because they tried to trade him. They tried to give him away. But every team out there wants a sweetener or them to retain salary. They're not going to do that. Jim Hiller worked with him before as an assistant coach. I think Rielly is going to start the season and may stay with Toronto. Larkin, I think, falls victim to the fact that they don't have a general manager, so they're not going to be forced into a deal. Hellebuyck, I think, is the most likely, because I just can't see him going back to Winnipeg, especially after it's clear that he is requested out, even though it's not been a public pronouncement. But the more time that goes by, the less chance I think it's going to be Buffalo. I think it's going to be Carolina or New Jersey where he ends up. But, whatever team trades for him is going to have to give them a good package. And I don't know whether Carolina or New Jersey will give them something that they'll think it's a good package.
Karine, what do you think?
I actually have to agree with Mike again. This is a weird day. I'm agreeing with Mike way too much. But Hellebuyck seems to be the guy that has the biggest chance of moving from Winnipeg. I'd say, he's one of those members of the American Olympic team that wants to go back home. Well, he's not said it, but, that's what it looks like. And like Mike said, the Wings don't have a GM right now, and it's going to be hard for them to find a package that they actually like for Larkin. I mean, he's their captain. He's a big piece, so you don't just give that away. I would say Hellebuyck is the most likely to go.
All right. Well, we're going to hold you guys to those predictions. We'll see what happens by the end of the offseason here. Of course, if you want to read any more about any of the players, teams, topics that we have talked about here on the show today, head over to the Hockey News. It's been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947. 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start. It's a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. That's going to do it for today's episode of The Wraparound. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in today. We really do appreciate it. We will be back with an all-new episode next week. But for now, for Michael Augello and Karine Hains, I'm Emma Lingan. This is The Wraparound, and we will see you next time.